Measures Advisory Committee to order at 2:01 on the 4th of March. First order of business is a flag salute. So if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there any request for any modifications of the agenda by any of the committee members? No requests for modifications of the agenda, then we'll move forward as the agenda is presently constituted. This is the opportunity for any members of the public to comment on non-agenda items. If you would like to make a comment to the committee on any matter not on today's agenda, now would be the time to do so. And our staff will probably sequence these calls if in fact there are multiple calls. So go ahead, staff, if you'd like to sequence through any public comments.
Leanza, do we have anybody in the attendee list looking to make comment?
Don't see it that anybody has their hand raised.
And for the people who are calling in or who are Zooming in right now, if you're on the phone, you can press *6 to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment, or if you're on Zoom, you can press the raise hand button if you'd like to make a comment.
Okay, one last time, if there's any members of the public who would like to make a comment on an item not on the agenda, would you please indicate to the staff your inclination to do so?
I'm not seeing anybody with the hand raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next item would be the discussion items, section D of the agenda. The first is the approval of the January 7th, 2021 action summary. Does anyone have any modifications or corrections to the agenda summary that they would like to propose, or questions of the agenda summary as proposed? Hearing and seeing none, would there be a motion to approve the action summary as presented by staff?
Move that we approve the action.
Okay, we have, go ahead, I'm sorry, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, Nicholas, thank you. Motion and a second to approve the action summary as submitted. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Looks like it's unanimous.
This is Bob. I have to abstain. I was not a member of the committee at the time.
Okay, thank you. Which is a good segue. As the committee members are probably aware, there's been a shuffling of the committee a little bit. We have a new member, Mr. Bronkel. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Chair Zemer, can I
Sure.
interject for just a second? Before we pass the action summary, can we go out for public comment, please?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, my apologies. Yes, any members of the public like to comment on the action to approve the action summary or minutes as they were presented by staff?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, with no public comment, we would then consider the action summary or minutes approved as presented. Mr. Bronkel, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi. Thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for welcoming me to the committee. It is a great honor to be able to participate in this committee. And I do want to thank all the other committee members for the hard work and dedication that they put into this. After reviewing all these applications and spending hours reviewing things and contemplating things, you guys all deserve a lot of money for doing this. It is a big time commitment, and you certainly do not get enough thanks for all the hard work and effort that goes into preparing and participating in these meetings. With that being said, I'm a civil engineer by trade. I'm employed by Humboldt County Public Works Department. I'm a taxpayer in the community, and I look forward into participating and helping make this committee as effective as it can with the efficient use of the taxpayers' money.
Okay, thank you. As the committee also, I believe, knows, but the public may not, one of our alternates has moved into a designated position on the committee. And my understanding is there is currently one vacancy as an alternate position that the staff will be taking to the Board of Supervisors sometime in the near future. Do we have any timeline for that alternate appointment, Mr. Quincy?
No, not at the moment, but I would imagine that we would be bringing that item to the board here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. All right, then moving on to D2, the County Administrative Office updates. The first item is the review of the Board of Supervisors recommendations regarding the set aside funding for small application requests.
Yeah, so this idea has been talked about a little bit, mostly at the board level, specifically at the mid-year agenda, item with the Board of Supervisors. Supervisors talked about creating a process to evaluate small value requests. There wasn't any specific number or action taken on directing any process here. It was something for your committee to consider. Some of the potential numbers that were discussed were possibly carving out a piece of Measure Z revenue, maybe $100,000 or whatever amount your committee feels is appropriate to evaluate small value requests, possibly $10,000 or less. And so that's something that the board talked about. They realized that there are a lot of small value requests, like there was an Access Humboldt request that was approved by the board at the mid-year budget report for, I think, $1,700, and evaluating those amongst requests that are hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars. They thought that the committee might want to think about creating a separate process for those small value requests.
So do I understand correctly, by way of process, that the board is asking for input from the committee on the concept at this point?
It is, they are not asking for you to report back to the board on that, but it is something that they wanted you guys to consider.
Okay. I would imagine the committee members remember, at least the majority of us, Supervisor Wilson had brought this concept forward a little over a year ago, I believe, and we agendized a discussion of it. My memory, and that's only what I have available as my memory, is that at the time we considered the concept, or at least brought it forward for initial discussion, was the same time that the rather unfortunate decline in the revenue, or at least a limiting in the growth of the revenue, was also discussed. And the committee's decision, I guess, or action taken at that time was not to move forward with consideration of it. Supervisor Wilson has forwarded some communications to me indicating he is still interested in it. Supervisor Madrone has also similarly entered his interest in it, and so on. And they asked for some potential mechanisms and so on. So in a communication in response to Supervisor Wilson, I offered one possible suggestion about how it might work mechanically. And the discussion that he and I had was basically that it might be possible to take some of the excess revenue that exists after all the allocations are made and the county's books are closed for the year. Every year that the fund has existed, there has in fact been some excess or surplus, and it might be possible in the January, February, March period of a following year for the board to allocate a certain amount to these small requests in a similar manner to the allocations they just recently made with the excess funding and so on. I expressed to him that that might be a mechanism that would be possible and so on. And that would spread the timing of consideration of these small requests out a little bit from the consideration of the more substantial requests. I did not get any kind of response from him indicating he, supported that concept or anything else, but I just wanted to disclose that those communications were made between myself and the two supervisors. I have not heard from any other supervisors. So I'm a little unsure at this point on how the committee would like to proceed or what action we would like to take, if any. Mr. Hansel.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chair Teamer. So I do have an opinion on this. Number one, that this is a tax measure put in place for essential services. I think my opinion is once the county has fulfilled all their obligation to the essential services of the county, then they can look beyond and try to fund some other feel-good programs. And I do appreciate our board being attentive to having some kind of a program to do micro grants or those kind of things. I think that's very appropriate, but Measure Z is not that fun to use. There are always needs in public safety right now. Every year, fire cuts back their allocation to support other public safety services. There's other things that go unfunded as far as public safety. Roads have not been funded from Measure Z really significantly over the course of Measure Z. They've always got the leftovers, okay? And I just want to continue to push back on the original ballot language, which is public safety, essential services, and roads. That is what really this committee should be focused on. That's what the board should be focused on. And then again, once we have all those things covered, if there's leftover, like we said, then at that point in time, all of our needs are met. Micro grants can come forth and be, be funded through that. But I just don't see that and coming anytime soon. But that, again, my opinion as a committee member.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee members like to speak to that concept? Mr. Bronco?
I would like to echo what Sheriff Hansel had mentioned and to further clarify the way that roads had been allocated money through this process. In the early years of Measure Z, the money that was left over was allocated toward roads. And then up until recently, in the past couple of years, that had been continuing forward. And then most recently, with last year, there were other projects that were allocated any surplus funding that may become available, and roads was left holding an empty bag at the end of the year. So things have been shifting, and it seems that roads is getting the shorter end of the stick as far as allocations go. If it's the committee's desire that, and as it had been historically done by the committee, that a group of projects are funded and then whatever scraps are left over gets allocated to roads, then at least that's a mechanism where roads is getting some funding. Absent of that, we're now seeing things where every single project is becoming highly competitive in how they're trying to position themselves to go ahead and get funding. And this year's no different than any other year. You read these applications, they all are deserving of funding for the most part. Thank you.
Ernie, I believe you were next.
Yeah, I wanted to say I agree with Sheriff Hansel on this, and that in years past, the Board of Supervisors have been told that we feel that they should follow our recommendations. And the year before that, we didn't give a complete list of recommendations. So last year, we prioritized the whole list of recommendations, and the money that was quote unquote left over was allocated by the Board of Supervisors. And if they had read what our recommendations were, we made a listing of all the recommendations all the way through the list as to what we thought should be recommended and passed by the Board of Supervisors. Yet they pulled things back out of, they took the leftover money and didn't follow the recommendations hardly at all. And I think it was the wrong thing to do. Even the grand jury at one time made an issue with the Board of Supervisors that they needed to more closely follow the recommendations of the committee. And I know people like Ginger spend more time than maybe she should with these applications. She spends an enormous amount of time, and I spend a considerable amount of time on them, and it's kind of, I find it, no, I'm keep wanting to say offensive, but I'm not offended. I'm just curious as to why they would disregard our hard work on the recommendations. And they chose some things this year that was clear down at the bottom of our list. And Supervisor Bone was willing to follow the list that we gave him, and I kind of appreciated that. I have to forgive Michelle Bushnell, because she was kind of taken right from the election into the Board of Supervisors, and she was caught somewhat off guard. And I don't think that she would have made some of the changes that the Board of Supervisors made if she was more up to speed. And I kind of agree with Sheriff Hansel on his recommendation. I'm hoping he'll make that into a motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, I think I'd like to try to focus this portion of the discussion specifically on the small grants element of it. I agree entirely with what Ernie just said, but our next action item actually is a discussion of the excess allocation. So maybe we could keep those two concepts a little bit separate. What I'm interested in this point is thoughts of the committee members on the concept of a small allocation fund. Anyone else like to speak to that concept?
Mr. Chair.
Justin, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Sheriff Hansel said. I'm in complete agreement with where it was started at. And that said, taking a step back from that comment, if this committee were to consider a separate process for small grants, I would want us to have that flushed out prior to the application period. So it's in my opinion, it's certainly not appropriate at this time. There's only two, as far as I can tell, there's only 2 applications that are below $10,000 currently that we're looking at, and I don't think it's the best form to for us to come up with a process right now after groups have already applied after the fact. So I would recommend that we in essence continue to have the discussion, but defer any potential action on a sub-grant category until basically this year is done, and that should be determined in advance to the application period being open, so it's clear to those that are applying, what the courses that they can pursue are. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the topic?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
I support this idea. I would like to see an availability of micro grants available. I do not think it's appropriate to do this term. I think we have our work cut out for us already, but I think discussing how we would address this moving forward is very important. Specifically because each year on this committee, I've seen a reduction in the number of applications. I feel there is a feeling among the community that the priorities of this committee have really already been stated, and that agencies that would fit under the letter of the ordinance are not bothering to apply because they feel that they do not stand a chance against the priorities that we have set forth. I think it would be an opportunity to create reach out and inclusion in the community on a small level that could get people to buy into the process and participate. And there could be a benefit to the community there. So I would support this down the road. I hope we continue this conversation. I do not feel it's appropriate at this time.
Okay. Anyone else? Ginger?
Okay, my little hand goes down. So just mechanically, I mean, I'm not in favor of it, but mechanically having several or a bunch or however many small mini grants, I don't know who would be in charge of that, because I think our committee has a lot to do in a short period of time. And I think that, you know, when we have outside contractors outside of the county, county positions that we fund, then there's quarterly reports that are required. There's, I mean, I think it would be an entirely different set of rules or somehow tracking. And I think that, you know, I'm not sure our committee would be the one to choose. I think if the board wants to do that, then maybe they should set up a subcommittee. This year we had $753,000 left over. So leftover money wouldn't, you know, they'd have to choose an amount. But I just think that technically it would be a lot of work for us to choose micro grants, and it would have to be on somebody else. And I'm not sure anybody else wants to do it, as you know, and for the staff to have to track the quarterly reports for mini grants and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a whole different ballgame when you get into doing something different than what we're already doing. So I'm not for it, but I'm just saying that's something to consider in the future.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to speak to it?
This is Eddie. I'll be really short and brief. I totally agree with what all the other members have been saying. And if I had to summarize, I say that if we did take these mini grants, it's a mission creep. And as a business owner, I think we stated that there were certain objectives that we originally wanted, and we should stick to those. And changing the plan would not be the best. So I don't think we should be in the business of mission creep and just stay the course and maybe come up with other opportunities later.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the topic? Again, just by way of disclosure, in my conversations with supervisors regarding our next agenda topic, which was the allocation of the excess funding,
I believe Mr. Bender had a comment that he wanted to contribute.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Nicholas.
I believe Mr. Bender had a comment that he wanted to contribute.
I didn't
Scott
notice.
wants to speak.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just should have spoke up. Anyway, I'm in favor of establishing this type of thing. I don't know what kind of mechanism we're going to use. I don't think it'd be appropriate for this cycle. But all I do know is that some of the outlying areas with smaller populations are being overlooked. I've heard about it from people out of the area that have talked to me in the past. And I think that in the spirit of the measure, their requests count too. Because they are a smaller population, a lot of the times their requests are smaller in dollar size. But in terms of per capita, it actually is larger. So I'd like to see some sort of mechanism worked out so that our communities that are in remote regions, in Southern Humboldt, in Northeastern Humboldt specifically, which is my district, I'd like to see them being considered as well on an even keel, as long as it pertains to the ballot language as being public safety and roads. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak to this topic? Again, by way of disclosure, in my communications with the supervisors regarding the excess allocation, Supervisor Madrone was very, I think, adamant, I guess is the word I would use, in his support of the concept. Supervisor Wilson was equally adamant that he thought it was something that we should begin to embrace. At this point, my polling is basically that there are 2 strongly positive votes, and then the other 3 supervisors are undecided or haven't committed to any particular position. So I guess my summary would be that I would ask staff to convey back to the board that we had this discussion, that the committee is split on the position we should take, but there are concerns about the applicability of it. Number one, there are concerns that the spirit of the measure might be violated in the sense that we do not have the funding currently even to fund the highly rated projects, regardless of their size, and that those in fact were what was sold to the public and carried the measure. and that we're certainly open to their direction as an advisory committee, but we don't feel that it's appropriate for any kind of action during the time period of this particular allocation process. Does everybody feel that's a fair characterization of the discussion? I'm not seeing any objections, so I guess I would ask staff to just convey back to the Board of Supervisors that this discussion took place, and the elements that I just delineated would be our posture at this time. We can't
Chair
take any.
Zemer, it looks like Sean Robertson has a comment to make.
Okay, I'm sorry, he's not visible on my screen, so I didn't see him. Go ahead, Sean.
Chair Zima, as the only board member who didn't, or committee member who didn't comment on your original question, largely because everybody captured my thoughts. I would just say what your closing captured comment to pass on to the board is something I agree with.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other commentary on this topic or anything staff would like to add to the discussion? Any
No,
public?
no, Chair, I would just say that also, especially when these funds are allocated to outside agencies, there are also contracts that need to be developed with them, and that can take some time and effort for each and every one of these contracts to be developed.
Okay. Any public like to comment on this concept or this discussion?
I don't see any, oh, there is one member of the public with their hand raised. So
Okay,
I
can you
will
recognize them?
unmute them. Yeah, their name is Mike Johnson, and I will unmute them.
Mr. Johnson, welcome to the meeting. I understand you'd like to comment on this discussion.
You are muted. You will have to unmute yourself. I can prompt you, but
I
there
see.
you go.
Thank you. As someone who was an advocate for Measure Z and Measure O and has worked with other local ballot measures, I would say that I encourage you to follow the language of the ballot measure as the voters saw it and voted on it. And you may run the risk of angering your constituents, so to speak, the taxpayers. And essential services, as was already stated, suffers yearly, it seems, budget-wise. And I would just ask you to continue to follow the measure language that the voters voted on, and we appreciate your work as committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any other public comment?
I don't see any other public comment.
Okay, so if staff could characterize this discussion back to the board as they feel appropriate, we'll move on then to the next item, which is the discussion of the allocation of the excess funding, which is D3. Mr. Quincy, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. So this is the year-end update agenda item. And there's not too much to talk about here. We can talk about on January 26th, the board allocated additional funds. That was carry forward funding from the prior year and updated estimates for the current year. The total carry forward amount was $527,000. And there was total allocations of $753,000. There were a number of projects that were funded. Again, those projects are on the January 26th agenda for the board. The updated projections that we have for funding for or revenue, I'm sorry, for 2021. We adopted the budget with $9.473 million in estimated revenue. That projection has increased to $11.078 million. Our estimated fund balance at the end of the year is about $31,000. And so that would carry over into be available for allocation in 21-22. And that's my update for this agenda item.
Okay, if you don't mind, just for clarity, I'd like to separate the two discussions. Let's talk about the January 26th action of the Board of Supervisors. I received some citizen input, and I've also received some input from members of the committee indicating, I guess, a little bit of heartburn about the process and so on, and the fact that for the first time, the Board of Supervisors went pretty substantially off of the recommendations of the committee. So for those of you who wanted to bring that issue forward, now would be an appropriate time.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead.
Who'd you
Go
call
ahead.
on?
Go ahead, Ernie.
I think I made my view pretty well known that I agree that we need to stick with the script of the Measure Z. And also, I think that the Board of Supervisors went too far off of our recommendations at the end of the year when there was money left over, because we spent a whole bunch of time going through the complete list to make recommendations, and they just didn't pay any attention to that at all, with a couple of exceptions. So that I'd like to echo Sheriff Hansel and Mr. Johnson in their recommendations that this fund was basically for emergency services and roads, and we need to stick to that, or we're not going to get much support from the public.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Chair.
Sheriff?
Thank you. One is last year we had a great committee meeting. We ranked them in order, and I thought it was very efficient. And the board actually took our recommendations at that first board meeting, and so I applaud them for that. It was really, really great. It's just that carryover is where the kind of wheels fell off the bus, so to speak. So I think essentially this committee needs to take an active role at that mid-year type meeting, so we can just remind them of our priorities and what the work of this committee did. And so I think that would be definitely appropriate for next year, to remind them of our funding and also the ranked priorities that they should really look at next. And we could be in a different situation. They have total discretion about how to spend the money. But I really believe that if we're there at the meeting expressing our views and expressing how we vetted all these and the reason why they're in the priority that they're in, then I think they're going to give credence to our list.
Okay, thank you. Ginger?
I like my little hand feature. So it wasn't the first time that they've done this. Was that Ernie that you said that, or was it Glenn? So about 3 years ago, the same thing happened where we did the same amount of work and then they kind of did their own thing, and we sent them a pretty direct letter and they acknowledged it. I believe one of the supervisors even came to our meeting and kind of apologized. And then Glenn, I think you went to the Board of Supervisors meeting even and spoke about that. And I think that, it's my understanding that they were overwhelmed at this last meeting, or at the 26th meeting. They had a hesitancy on Mike's part, Wilson, and they finally just said, okay, but we can't just have them do okay. They have to, I think we even at one point just sent them back some recommendations and a lot of money and said, well, since you're not going to take our recommendations, you do it. And they kind of freaked, they said, no, we really want you to do this. We honor you. We know it's a transparent committee. We're so sorry. And then they did it again. So I think Sheriff Hansel's right. We need to be there. Ernie was there. Ernie spoke up and told my internet went out right before the meeting. I was all prepared to do it, but and he said how disappointed that he was, and actually I understand that Rex did say something to everybody at the meeting and said, we can't do this. These people worked hard. So in reference to that, some of these aren't essential services or public safety, I think most of them actually sort of are, fit the bill. There's a couple that maybe not. But Bob, have you seen the list of the revenues that were the leftover revenues that were allocated? Did you get that list?
Whom are you speaking to, Ginger?
Bob, our new member.
Okay.
Yes, I've seen the list.
Okay,
I don't have
because
it in front of me,
because
but I've seen it.
okay, but there was $553,000 that did get given to roads and public works. I know it's, you said that you get the leftovers, and you did, but it was a good leftover this year for that reason. But we can't count on that. That's the problem. We need to make sure that they get their piece of the pie. So anyway, I just wanted to speak to that, I think that I would like to recommend some type of another letter from Glenn, or from our committee or something, to tell them once again, that this is what we do. We do it with diligence and with honesty and integrity, and we all spend a lot of time doing it, and that we would appreciate if they would do what they said they're going to do. And I don't think it hurts to get some type of a letter to them from our chair.
Anyone else like to speak to this topic?
Chair, I would like to just mention that there is one more item coming to the board on this coming Tuesday, March 9th, around the 211 application. The board awarded funding at the January 26th meeting, I believe. However, it appears that the purpose for the funding for 211 has substantially changed since then, and that agenda item is coming back to the board. Will be heard on the 9th.
Has the staff taken any or forwarded any recommendation to the board in regards to what the staff's posture or position is regarding that? I would say, complete change in the supposed allocation of the money?
No,
It's just a process.
That's completely board discretion.
Okay.
But we did note that the purpose of the funding has been substantially changed.
Yeah. For the sake of the committee's discussion here, first of all, I'd like to say, I'm not real happy about the process on the 26th, but in fairness, I missed the meeting. Unfortunately, I missed the notice and I didn't participate. Thank you, Ernie, for doing so. So part of that falls on to me, certainly. But this 211 thing to me raises a whole nother issue, irrespective of how you feel about the board allocating the money initially to 211. I'm very troubled by the concept that you could take an application to either the committee or the board of supervisors, have it approved, and then turn around when the contract is to be executed and totally, and I do mean totally, redirect the money. The application was for a whole bunch of technical elements and equipment and so on. And as characterized in Ms. Hayes's memo to us, the request now is to totally turn it into our personnel funding mechanism. So irrespective of whether or not the board should have initially allocated the money to 211, to me, there's a much more substantial issue. And I would like us to communicate to the board to say that we feel it would be a serious error to allow an applicant to make application under one pretense and then totally redirect the money after the approval had been given. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that. Ernie?
Yeah, without saying anything about 211, whether it's good or bad, I really think it's a great service. However, it was ranked clear down near the bottom of our list of recommendations, and it was a great amount of money, and they moved it right up to the top. And that's the thing that kind of disturbed me. They didn't research anything like the committee did, and they just moved 211 right to the top without any research, and just a feel good thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why they did that. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak to the topic?
I have a comment to throw out on this one. And it really kind of comes to a question to us as committee members. If we have an example where an applicant misallocates funds how do we respond to that? Do we view that as a breach of terms, and are they eligible for further consideration? And I think that's the question that we really need to discuss.
Okay. Other viewpoints?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
could we get a confirmation from county staff that I'd like to make a motion here, but I want to be clear before I do that 211's application as initially submitted to this committee was for technical assistance for technical technology for equipment, and has been resubmitted to the Board of Supervisors for salaries. Can we get a confirmation from county staff that that is the case?
I agree with you, Justin. Just, did you see Ms. Hayes's memo or email dated February 26th that talks about the allocation of the excess funds? And then the email ends with her characterization of that process. And I think I was fair in my paraphrasing of hers, but have you seen that document?
Yes, I have. And just one moment here, I'm going to reread it again.
Okay.
So the chair, if I might,
Certainly.
I'm looking at the 201 application from last year, and there were a couple elements to it. $16,500 was for after-hour call center charges when the calls go to San Bernardino, I believe. And then there were fixed assets, 5 computers, mobile hotspots, an indoor generator, network storage, a router, and then about $800 for hourly service from an IT technician.
Okay, and do I understand Ms. Hayes's communication? And she and I had a phone conversation. The new request is to fund almost exclusively personnel costs. Is that correct, or a fair characterization?
That's correct.
Go ahead, Justin, you had the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that the committee send a communication to the Board of Supervisors to reconsider the funding of 201's application for personnel, and that the committee wishes to communicate that project not be funded and that money be returned to potential allocation for the 2021-2022 fiscal year.
Okay. We have a proposed motion. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, the sheriff seconds. Any public comment? Any public comment on our discussion of communicating with the Board of Supervisors, our concern about the revision of the 211 call center application from last year?
Yes, there is one public comment from Tom Matson. I will let him in to talk.
Okay.
Actually, my comment is on the mid-year allocation. I wanted to make a clarification so I can wait until you're done with this motion, since that was the original subject of the agenda item.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment on the concept of communicating with the Board of Supervisors regarding proposed revisions to the 211 application?
Don't see any other hands raised.
Okay, any discussion of the committee? Okay. Would you want to conduct a roll call vote then, since it's a motion?
Sure. I will just go through how I have it tiled on my screen. Mr. Bronkel?
Yes.
Ernie?
Yes.
Ginger?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Eddie? I'm sorry. Nicholas?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And Glenn?
Yes. Does staff have the capability at this point in time to include the committee's motion and concern in your supporting material that will go to your Board of Supervisors agenda next week, or do we need to create a document to communicate this concern?
Let's see, the agenda is going to be posted tomorrow. If the committee would, I would suggest that the committee write something and email it into the clerk of the board's office.
Okay, I'll complete that. If the committee's okay, I'll author a document summarizing this discussion and indicate our desire that, as Justin's motion indicates, they do not fund 211 this cycle based on our concern over setting a precedent of completely revising the utilization of an application that's been approved after the approval. Okay, I will create such a document and forward it to the clerk of the board.
Mr. Chair,
Sir,
just to make sure that Mr. Quincy's, I didn't hear a vote for Sheriff Hansel or myself. Not that I feel too left out, but just to make sure that we're both on there as well for that vote.
I thought I heard Sheriff Hansel. I can't recall whether you voted, but in any case, would you do that, please, Mr. Quincy?
Absolutely. Sheriff.
Yes.
Justin.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding me.
Of course.
Okay, so the motion is unanimous then.
First meeting jitters.
Jitters, we're an easy bunch. Come on. Okay, the next item is our item D4, which is a financial planning discussion. Mr. Quincy?
This, and I believe that this item came from Mr. Cole.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is more kind of me having a couple of years to chew on my experience working with you, with everyone on this committee. I've had concerns, and we've all had concerns about the long-term look of how this committee is able to expend funds, how we're able to help the community, what we're able to support. I'm concerned that as we have continued increased costs of the guaranteed positions, that we need to discuss at what point on the committee level is this functional? What is the mechanism that we look at to view the allocation process? How much money do we need to be able to allocate to make this work? And up to this point, we really haven't able even to have a discussion about this outside of a committee meeting process. And so my goal was really just to be able to talk to everybody about what do they see in the future of this committee? What do they see in the expenditures? I'll stop there.
Okay. Maybe just a couple comments that would prompt the discussion a little bit. As you may recall, we communicated this concern to the Board of Supervisors a little over, well, we actually communicated it to them a year ago in September. The board didn't take up the discussion until late December. And at that point in time, it was pretty much a moot discussion because the process had already, begun its way through completion. The Board of Supervisors did appoint a task force on which the sheriff, I believe, and the district attorney, and I think a representative of the public defender's office took a look, and they developed a projection document, which was forwarded to us in April of last year that projected the status of the fund, both revenue and expenditure, through the 29-30 fiscal year. In order to have an intelligence discussion, I do have one question of staff at this point. Staff indicated that your current number for revenue for the 21-22 year is 11,078,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what is your projection currently for the county internal positions for that same time period? What does that total expenditure come to?
Oh, let's see, just for county positions?
Yes.
Let's see. It's about 8.3 million, 8.29 million.
8.29, okay.
This is for fiscal 2021.
Okay, so 8.29. Okay, the projection that the task force came up for that same time period was 8,253,000. So that hasn't varied, substantially. the concerns that I raised when this was discussed in, I think it was September of last year, is the staff made a number of assumptions, as you have to with projections, but they assumed that the revenue would increase substantially in the end of the time period. They were showing 0.5% and 1% projected revenue growth in the early years, but in the latter years, they bumped that revenue projection up to 3% per year. I never did hear what I thought was a reasonable explanation of why they assumed that the growth would go 5 to 6 times as much as it was in the early time period. So I've been skeptical of that task force report simply because it seemed like somebody chose arbitrarily to increase the revenue number to try to make the problem that we're identifying look less substantial. Obviously, we're going to have to wait till that time frame to find out, whether those projections are funded or founded in any kind of reality. But I share Nicholas's concern, and I'm interested in comments of other committee members at this point.
This is Eddie Morgan.
Yes, sir.
As a business owner in the local community, is having a business. I agree with your assessment. That when I saw those numbers, I was like, I'm not seeing that at my level as a business, and how is the county going to support that? So I voiced the same concerns. I agree with that.
Okay. Any other comments? Nicholas?
One thing I wanted to throw out, and that this is finally a chance for discussion. As local municipalities begin to enact their own public safety taxes, does that change our opinions as a committee about what our priorities are?
Just so I understand your question, Eureka's recent passage of Measure H, which was targeted at public safety and transportation, roads, and so on, is that the kind of thing you're referring to?
That's the type of thing I'm referring to. I believe there was something in Arcata regarding their local fire departments. There was something in Fortuna. I'm not sure where that stands. I don't believe those are enacted yet, and I'm not looking at that for immediate evaluation. But as those really come into effect, as committee members, I think that impacts how we need to prioritize things.
Other thoughts?
I got weigh in on that. I think Chair Ziemer.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It's something, Nick, that I think it definitely is something that needs to be vetted there as taxes get passed for those specific purposes throughout the different municipalities. I think that's something that this committee can definitely review, and to see if the municipalities have the ability to fund their own public safety issues or road issues or whatnot. So I think that is a valid question. I'm not sure as far as, reporting back to the 10-year projection, Chair Ziemer, that, how they came up with the 3%. It's a very good logical question. And then what does this committee do when we eventually run out of money and essentially the county absorbs all of the allocation? And, I just want to remind this committee, the reason why I think it is in existence is like a watchdog group. We really need to look out to see how the money is being spent. And so reevaluating the county government and how I spend the money and the district attorneys spend the money and those kind of things to make sure that it is going to what the voters wanted. I think it's very important that does happen. And I think it's an important aspect of our committee and what we do, and as the representatives of the taxpayers, and making sure that we hold all of the agencies that have Measure Z money accountable for how they're spending their money.
Okay. Other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Justin, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Nicholas, I've thought a lot about, you brought this up numerous times before, and each time we have one of these meetings and I'm going home and going to work, I'm thinking about it. And on one hand, the problem of the money running out because of county staff allocations to be honest, I kind of set myself free of that. If that's the case, then taxes would have to be raised, or another revenue stream would have to be procured to do it. And that really falls on the responsibility of, well, all of us as residents of the county and on the Board of Supervisors. So there is an avenue for that. And if all the money of this Measure Z is going towards county services, and then there's that demand from the public, our role as committee members and individuals citizens who care would be to advocate for, in my personal opinion, would be to advocate for an additional increase in sales tax. And that could be for specifically for the Measure Z, Measure O type of public safety projects, or could be specifically on roads or specifically on law enforcement. But there'd be the county as a whole would really need to be engaged there, and a conversation would need to be had. You know, what can we pay for and what do we want to pay for? The other thing too, I think a lot about is that, especially this year for me, when I've always been prepared to vote, but this year I get to vote, and it would be so helpful to have a greater understanding of the overview of services and service extents and historic service providing of the individual fire departments and agencies within the county. And I think that the Lolita Chamber of Commerce request that we see really exemplifies that. Here's a community asking for $500,000 for all the services that a municipality would provide. And so it shows the demand, but it's very difficult for, not very difficult, it's a challenge to evaluate that effectively versus other communities, because different communities are paying in different taxes and have agreed to be taxed differently. And so there's that equity that we're looking at as well. And obviously we can't propose a study right now, but I know I would like to, maybe when we get through this process, rating this year's application, I'd like to consider and bring in a potential amendment to the floor that this committee basically write to Humboldt State University and or College of the Redwoods to be that academic study institute that can help this committee and the Board of Supervisors to, it's basically that what currently exists and what the need assessment is, and something that this committee as a whole and the Board of Supervisors can look at and evaluate, because there are just different needs in different places, and different communities are putting up different sources of money. And another example of that would be the amount of money that was just reallocated, where we have money going to, was it Orleans, for fire department construction, which I support. And yet that request was outside of the Fire Chiefs Association request. And we were all, most of us were in the room and understand how that came about. But it would be great to get an understanding of, what's that snapshot of each department, and in essence, give each of us an education on what's going on at various ends of the county. I know that for me, my role here as general manager and talking with other communities and other CSD community service directors, I'm kind of given a little bit of that insight. But it's certainly not complete, and there's certainly a lot more that would be great to see in a report to help us determine the suitability for the limited resources that we have. So Nicholas, it's kind of a different, I guess, a different take on it, not a different take, but a different avenue. I see to me, that's a reality. The money is going to go away, and Evans will have to deal with that one way or another. But how can we be more effective and more knowledgeable about where we're making recommendations? And to me, the way to do that is for there to be a report of some nature that discloses the facts and the capacities of these agencies and organizations throughout the county, and something that we all take and digest. So it's not just one-on-one stories that are influencing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Other thoughts? Mr. Colt? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I can't tell who is requesting.
Sean and Ernie had comments that I'd like to give them a chance to voice.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ernie.
Okay, this is probably a little bit off the subject, but I would like, how do I go and find the reports that the people who've issued this money submit to the county to tell you how they've spent it? Would that be a question for Sean Quincy, or is that?
Yeah.
Where do I go to find the reports?
Yeah,
Mr.
so the quarterly reports are posted on our website. If you go to humboldtgov.org/Measure Z, we have the quarterly reports there posted by application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Nicholas, would you like to, is this discussion doing what you hoped it would do, or is there a specific action you are trying to urge us to take, or where would you like the conversation to go?
I would like to just, I want to, I can finish this up, and I just want to, I very much appreciate Justin's point of view. Where I'm coming from is it's always better to talk about financial shortfalls before they happen. It's better for us to have the discussions about finance before we're looking at it and say, oh, we don't have enough money this year. So I don't have a design for how this is going to go. I want us to be very aware and be able to discuss what we can do and how it's going to look. I think my concern is Measure Z has been being asked to do a lot. This fund is being asked to support a lot of the county staffing positions. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think the county is overstaffed. But my problem and my challenge is it can't do that and the rest of the things that it's listed in the ballot. And so how do we prioritize? I think us as a committee, we are the mechanism to prioritize that. And we have to be able to shift, and we have to be able to take information from the people we talk to in the community, what we hear from public comment. We have to chew on all. And so I really wanted us, my biggest goal was for us to be able to be aware of it and to be able to discuss how we approach this. And I know I'm not going to get an answer today, and I know I'm taking your time, and I really appreciate it, but I needed to have the discussion.
Mr. Robertson, did you have something you popped up?
I did. A couple of thoughts. One is I appreciate this discussion. We attempted it last year. We attempted it the year before. The issue is still, as Nicholas just eloquently stated, is the imbalance of the request for Z with us being able to execute those, and the concern that the further forward we go, the less we're actually going to be able to do anything. And I understand that part of the intent of the measure was to provide county services, but when that becomes 80% of the revenue, then like Nicholas said, we're unable to do the other things that the measure was put in place for. As a beneficiary of municipality tax increases, I just wanted to give my comments on that. Specifically in the state of Eureka, Arcata, the requests from those entities are relatively minor, if not non-existent. Myself, as a city fire department, I benefit from the tax base. Many other agencies don't have that ability, but we don't ask for operational requests. For example, there are multiple requests in here from law enforcement agencies from what I would consider to be operational equipment that I budget for every year, and they have a tax base. So that just seems part of the inequity that Justin spoke to is the further forward we go, the less equitable it becomes in meeting the needs of the entire county. And as Nicholas also said, and we've struggled with, I don't see any really good solution. Even after the analysis was done, the effect on the county's general fund is unsustainable if we change it or cap it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Any public comment on this discussion topic?
Chair, before we go out to the public, county staff is the ones who ultimately provided the projections here, especially for revenue estimates. And, we take these revenue estimates incredibly seriously, especially when they affect the general fund. We don't do these revenue estimates in a vacuum. We work with consultants on these. There's a lot of factors that go into these revenue estimates. To give you an example of the volatility of sales tax, this year we adopted the budget with a little over $9 million in revenue, $9.4 million in revenue for Measure Z, and the adjusted budget is 11.1. I mean, it's a massive swing. Next year, sales tax has been performing in ways that we couldn't have predicted and shouldn't have predicted. We are forecasting $12.5 million for Measure Z revenue next year. So these, and that was in the forecast that we did last year. We weren't expecting to hit that number, $12.5 million, until I believe fiscal year 2027. So these revenue estimates can be volatile, but we take them very, very seriously and do as much research as we can on them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cole.
Sean, can you I just want to confirm something really quickly. Based on the numbers that you've discussed today, is it true we've got about $2.7 million to allocate in this session?
So I believe we have an agenda item later on to talk about this. That is, that's item D5C to review funding projections.
I will hold my question until then.
Okay.
Okay, Ginger.
Okay. So back to Nicholas's comment about other municipalities receiving tax dollars. I think that when there's I wish there was a way, and there may be too, when one agency is asking us for a large amount of money and they're very specific what it's going for, but the language in their ballot that they got for their money covers the same things. And so, it'd be good for us to know how much out of their tax measure they're going to get for those things before we start, or kind of a projection of what they're going to get, so that, or maybe they could withdraw their request for that amount because they know they're going to get it from their tax measure. And there's because I'm on the Measure G committee for Arcata, and that's police, that's public safety and roads, and I've been on it from the beginning, and I'm always there. We're an oversight committee as well, but I'm always really careful to make sure that they're spending the money on particular things that they're not asking us for, because I don't think, then it gets confusing. It's like, well, you've asked for this under your measure, and then you're asking us for the same thing. And it would be helpful, because it could be a huge amount of money. It could be a lot of money that they could withdraw requests from if that was the case. So I don't know how we would do that, but it's something in the future we could talk about. So.
Okay. Any other Ernie?
Yeah, the only problem I have with what Ginger's talking about, and I understand that we don't like to fund things that are already being funded, but all these small communities are paying into Measure Z, so they technically qualify from that standpoint to apply. I wish there was some way we could apportion, rather than last year we took the whole thing or nothing, and some things I think that probably are a good viable project. I'd like to see other agencies have a little skin in the game too. I won't give any examples, but there's some examples where it's a very expensive project and they're asking for the complete thing to be funded by Measure Z. If they had some funding or some skin in the game, it would make it more palatable for us to give them a certain amount of money to. But if they put in an application for the whole job and they already have something else going, I don't know, that we would have to kick it out entirely because we couldn't afford to spend the amount of money that they're asking for a project. I'm just saying, that's all.
Nicholas?
I think one thing to think about that I think about that is we can make I think through making the recommendations that we have, sending that to the Board of the Supervisors, they can decide if there's money available to fund any shortcoming, as opposed to us having to, it goes back to that question of full funding or partial funding of applications. And I had to appreciate what Sheriff Hansel brought to the table about the problems of partial funding applications and what that means to the viability within that agency, being in a municipality or a nonprofit. And I think us going in and functionally as a committee, taking apart an application and partial funding it, it will be prohibitive.
Okay. Other comments from the committee members? Members of the public, anyone like to comment on this discussion from the public?
Chair,
It looks
looks like
like-
Mr. Blanco had a comment.
I'm sorry, Justin, you're off my screen, so I don't see you.
Well, on your right-hand corner of your screen, click the view button, and there's a drop-down box there, and you can click on gallery view, and you should be able to see all of us.
You understand that I'm 70 years old and a white guy, right?
Want me to tell you that again? Upper right-hand corner, click on view, and then hit gallery view. But yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to suggest that it sounds like we're all having issues with the way that we're currently evaluating the projects for consideration for funding. And perhaps what may need to happen is after we get through this exercise for allocating projects for this fiscal year, perhaps the committee will want to reconvene and explore the review process. What is the criteria that the committee should be looking at for reviewing and approving applications? And maybe it's time to revisit that as a way to deal with, one, the inequities that we're seeing with different types of projects moving forward, and two, to perhaps address that elephant in the room of that decreasing funding that's becoming available. And that may be the way that we work toward overcoming this, is sitting down and then having that roundtable discussion about how do we really want to move forward next year? What do we want to ask for differently in the applications? How do we want to score them? What's our grading rubric going to be? Thank you.
Okay. Nicholas, in response to trying to let this not just be an idle discussion, would you be in favor of having a meeting after the allocation process is done that I'll call, for lack of a better term, just a process meeting, where we would talk about these types of issues? We'd take a look potentially at input information along the lines that Justin was laying out, and try to identify, before we get into the scrum of trying to actually allocate the money, taking kind of a 30,000 foot view of the process and saying, we've been doing this, what, Ginger, 7 years now, I think it is. And now that we're a little older and wiser, we'd like to take a look at the process and maybe consider internally what we'd like to do. And then if necessary, get the board support for modifications to make it more efficient and address the kind of concerns that you've been identifying. Is that something that's worthwhile to you?
I think that would be a great way to move.
Okay. That's certainly within our capability, and that would be kind of my sense of how we could approach it. I believe we had some public comments. Did I understand correctly?
Yes, we have 2 public comment.
Can you go ahead and bring them up, please?
Yes, Walt Wilson, you are able to speak now.
Welcome.
Thank you. I am a resident of Fortuna, and I worked on the Measure E committee, which is the Fortuna Sales Use Tax Committee. and then the Measure G committee. Also worked on the Measure O committee, which is your committee. And I'm getting the flavor that the Z committee, you folks, are thinking of punishing the cities who have passed their own tax measures for passing those tax measures. That's dead wrong. Yeah, we should not be punished because we were forward enough looking to pass our own tax measures, because we still are contributing to the county tax measure. So don't cut us out or shortcut us just because we have passed our own tax measures. Ginger sits on the Measure G Oversight Committee in Arcata and is looking at the same situation. And I'm sure Ginger is not too happy about thinking of being getting reduced funding because Arcata looked forward enough to pass that tax measure. So that's my take on it. Don't cut us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Chair, the public comment should be limited to 3 minutes also. So I'll keep a timer over here and it'll sound once we get to 3 minutes, and it'll cue us, and we'll go ahead and mute the speakers at 3 minutes. All right.
Okay, thank you. Next public comment.
All right, next we have Miles Slatery. So I will let him in to talk as well.
Thanks, Sean. You must have saw that I was going to be the next public comment and decided to cut me off. But anyway, I'm Miles Slattery. I'm the city manager for the city of Eureka. I just heard some misinformation as it relates to Measure H, and I wanted to make some clarifying statements. Prior to this budget year, we made 12% cuts across the board in our budget. When we went out and we did the polling for Measure H, public safety was not the highest ranking. It was not the emphasis for this. As a matter of fact, the emphasis and the sale to the community was that this measure was to maintain services at a level, and that any other funding outside of that would go to roads. And so what we did is we cut 12%, dipped into our reserves over $2 million to balance this budget. We lost staffing in public safety. That public safety staffing is not going to come back. It's going to be maintained at the level that it is now. Any extra money is going to roads. The homeless services, quality of life, parks, those all ranked as high, if not higher, than public safety when they did our polling. And so we were very conscious of that. And when we did our public education and outreach related to this general tax measure, which wasn't a specific tax measure, it was based on the premise of maintaining services, and any ancillary funding would go to roads. So when we looked at the Measure Z funding and the application, we had previously always submitted for road funding. Knowing that that funding is in place, we removed that application and no longer have road funding. But as it relates to public safety, we are maintaining those services. We're not flush with money for public safety, and the remaining money that's not going to roads is going to maintain our existing services. So I just wanted you guys to know that and be clear that we're well aware that we don't want to double dip or anything like that, but we feel that our application that's in front of you is extremely important, not only from a public safety standpoint, but also to assist DHHS and the services that they provide. So this not only helps out the hub of the city as it relates to public safety, but it definitely takes away some of the responsibilities and adds to the effectiveness of the social services programming that we provide through that service. So just wanted to be clear on that.
Thank you for your input. Anyone else have public comment?
I don't see any more hands raised for public comment.
Okay, so the chair's sense is that there is support after the allocation meetings and so on are done to set a meeting time in the late spring, early summer to have what I'll call a process discussion. Is that a fair consensus? I'm seeing nodding heads. I'm not seeing any hostile hand signals, so I guess we'll consider that to be the consensus. Okay. Thank you for bringing that up, Nicholas. Next item is D5, the applications for fiscal 2021. Mr. Quincy?
Sure. So to be short, we received 30 applications this year from both city, from government agencies, special districts, and some nonprofits. The total amount of funding that is being requested is $7.3 million. That's my report.
Okay. By way of process with the committee, my thought is, given the time and the time constraints and so on, it made sense to go through the agenda, and we probably would get to the decision to vote to include or not include particular applications, but that would probably be the end of the discussion. The other aspect of that thought is that I had encouraged any of you that had questions or needed clarifications to forward those to staff, who would in turn forward them on to the applicants. The latest communication I've received in response to that was from Naftali this morning at about 11 o'clock. And at that point in time, the vast majority of those inquiries that she had forwarded had not yet had a response. So are you comfortable with going through the agenda and potentially getting to the in-out decision as far as the applicability of the applications? And then that would probably, looking at the time, if we were able to accomplish that, that's probably pretty much the limit of today's capability. And then start the actual ranking of applications at our next meeting. Are we comfortable with that?
Mr. Chair?
Sir.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I am curious to know if Nicholas brought it up partially a little bit ago. In years past, there was a dissecting and a request for reductions from applications. And last year, I don't think that's necessarily how it went. It was a little bit different. In essence, we kind of, this committee, made recommendations on full funding. For me personally, there's a lot of the applications from ambulance services and law enforcement agencies. I don't have particular questions on items, but there's a few that I do that are going into the details of the budget. There are some items that, in my opinion, can be cut that are not essential to emergency services. And also some questions on potential savings down the road. Questions of using leased vehicles versus buying leased vehicles, and why are you requesting maintenance costs in a vehicle that you're leasing? So it's $1,200 here, $1,000 here for the most part, but given the situation that we all know ourselves in, I think that's important. So, but I'm totally fine with just going by a simple yes, no on whether it meets Measure Z or not, and getting into those details of the next meeting.
Yeah, my thought was that since even the already submitted questions haven't had responses, and in my own case, I think I submitted 8 or 9 questions, and a couple of those at least are material to my decision on that particular application. So if we were to defer the process of starting the ranking till at least the next meeting, then each of you would have the opportunity to forward to staff any questions or clarification requests that you had. And then hopefully by the meeting on the 11th, we would be in a position to answer those, so that our discussion of ranking then would have a little more cogency, because we would have answers to the questions that the applications raised. Okay, there are 30 applications, as Mr. Quincy had indicated. Attached to those are some letters of support. Anything you want to add to the letters of support that were included in the communications that were forwarded to the committee members, Mr. Quincy?
So we, since the agenda has been posted, we've received a number of letters of support. However, that was, we received those less than 72 hours before the agenda was posted. So we'll go ahead and attach those to next week's agenda.
Okay, thank you.
In addition, Chair, we've received a couple more clarifications from questions from applicants. You guys, we sent some questions to the applicants through you guys, or from you guys, and over the last day or two, we've received a couple more responses, and we'll include those to next week's agenda as well.
Okay, just from my own understanding, and maybe this is my own technical inability, I tried to print out the existing responses and so on, and it wasn't in a PDF document form. Apparently it's some sort of a, I don't even know what it is. It's something on the county's platform and so on. Is it possible to just save those as a PDF for those of us who are technically challenged, and that way we'll have the capability to print them easily?
Sure, are you talking about the letters of support?
No, I'm talking about the responses. Naftali created a document that came to me in an email this morning that was a beginning of responses to the questions you had forwarded the applicants.
Sure.
And whatever format it shows up against a county backdrop and so on, it doesn't seem to be printer friendly, or I'm not capable. So I'm asking you to tolerate the old white guy and put it in a PDF that I know how to deal with.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, D5C is the review of the funding projections.
All right, so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we are projecting $12.514 million in funding for $12.515 million in revenue for Measure Z next year. That is based on activity from this year and the last half of last year. Sales tax has been our saving grace during the pandemic. The couple specific sectors have been performing extremely well. The online sales tax, I think you guys have had a little bit of this discussion before, but there was the Wayfair case at the Supreme Court allows sales tax to be delivered to the jurisdiction where products are actually delivered. And so that's been a boon to us. Plus things like construction have been really big this year. So we are increasing our projections to $12.5 million next year. County salary or ongoing costs look to be a little over $8 million, $8.074 million. That would leave $4.441 million left for allocation for fiscal year 21-22.
Just help me understand. We had a discussion earlier, and I heard 11,078 and 8,290 as being the revenue and the, I'll call it in-house county. Did I misunderstand the labeling of that?
So that was numbers for the current fiscal year.
Current fiscal year.
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
So can you, again, 12 million and what for revenue?
$12.515 million is what we're estimating for fiscal 21-22.
Okay, and the cost for the internal county, if they were funded at their current levels?
8.074.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any questions or clarifications from committee members? Any questions or clarifications from members of the public?
Looks like we have one comment, and I will let them in now.
Greetings, this is Fred Van Vleck, Superintendent, Eureka City Schools. Hey, just wanted to put out one point of clarification. On the email that came out about responding to questions, we were actually invited to attend the meeting to answer the questions personally or respond via email. And so I just want to make sure you didn't have a misunderstanding that if we didn't respond via email, we weren't here to answer questions.
Yeah, no, my sense was the timing was such, in the case of my own questions, they only made it to the county staff on Monday. And, you know, with a little bit of turnaround time, our expectation was that we probably wouldn't have an answer prior to the meeting on the 11th. So, but thank you for your clarification.
All right, we have one more member of the public.
Yeah, this is Tom Matson, Director of Public Works, and I want to second what Fred said. The email I got said, come to the meeting to answer the questions.
Okay. Given the length of the meetings and the limitations of Zoom, speaking for myself, I'm happy to have a written response to any question that you feel you can effectively respond to. If an applicant feels that the concept is complex or needs, some back and forth discussion, then that's certainly desirable and we'll be happy to accommodate that. But I don't mean to suggest that we expect everybody to wait for a couple hours in the queue just to answer a simple question. If you can effectively answer the question in a written format, please feel free to do that.
And we have one more public comment.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Bob Freilich, and I'm number 14 on that list from the Garberville Redway Public Restroom Working Group. And yeah, I had the same information and was prepared to answer the questions. I did do a written answer to the question. The problem is, I guess you're meeting again next week, and I will be actually traveling. I've got my second jab and I'm going to go down and visit my twins, my twin grandchildren. But anyway, so I won't be able to attend the meeting. So if there are additional questions, would I be able to have time to respond to those in writing?
Well, perhaps since you're here with us today, could a member of the staff just make the committee aware of the question that was forwarded to Mr. Froelich, and then we'll give you the opportunity to address it right now rather than try to do it in some inconvenient means for both of us?
Great. I could read the question, or do you want the staff member to read it?
If you have it there as it was communicated to you, that's fine. If you just state the question and then your response to it, so we have a clear understanding of the question and your response.
Yeah, the question is, and the application and the request was for providing a year's maintenance while we work on a sustainable program to get sustainable donors for the continuing the restroom at the Garberville Town Square. And the question was, why isn't the city of Garberville assisting with funding for a public restroom? And the answer to that question is because Garberville is an unincorporated town and has no tax base for doing that. I mean, we have water and sewer down there that's provided by the Garberville Sanitary District, but that's just water and sewer and maintaining the infrastructure. So there's no responsible town entity there that can provide that tax base. So we're attempting to keep that restroom there open and sustainable well into the future. And that's what I'm asking the committee for, or what our group is asking for.
Okay, thank you. Did the forwarder of the question have any follow-up that they would like to direct to Mr. Froelich?
Chair, so we forwarded questions off to applicants in assuming that we were going to get to item D7, the initial valuation of applications. And that could be a time for applicants to come up and answer those questions. But at the same time, we realize that some people may not be able to attend today's meeting. And so in the absence of being able to attend, we did ask if they could send written responses that we would send on to the board or to the committee.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Sir.
Yes, I've got a committee for Bob, a question for Bob, excuse me, while he's on the line here with us. And so
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry, Justin. Chair,
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm worried that we're getting out of the agenda. We still have item D6, where we talk about the process, and then D7 is where the initial valuation of the applications, I believe, would begin, and where this kind of back and forth questioning could take place.
Okay. I appreciate your point, Mr. Quincy. Mr. Froelich, I think your answer was clear and concise. So I think the essence of answering the question has been accomplished. But I will defer to Mr. Quincy's suggestion that we try to kind of capsulize this discussion and keep a little tighter to the agenda. So thank you for your time. I certainly understand your response, and I think it was clear and addressed the question that was forwarded to you.
And I thank you for taking the time with me. The only thing is, I'm wondering if there are other questions. Then, if I can't attend the meeting next week, how can I respond to those questions?
Any question that's generated by a committee member will be directed to the staff, and the staff will direct it to the applicant. And you can respond directly in an email format, or I suppose if you were unable to accomplish an email, some sort of hand-delivered document, and or a phone call where you just carefully addressed, we don't want to get into the interpretation game. Obviously, we want to give you the opportunity to answer the question in your own words, but a written response that's concise and addressed to the question would certainly be beneficial to both of us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, nothing further on funding projections, Mr. Quincy?
No, if we could just have a motion to accept staff's report and the applications, then we can move on to the next item.
Okay, so just so everyone's clear, myself included, the projection is for 12,515,000 in projected revenue. And at this time, the 8,074,000 is the projected expenditure for the captive amount going to the county agencies. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there someone in the committee willing to make the motion to accept the staff report?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the staff report as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any public comment? Okay, seeing none, I guess a roll call vote on the motion, please.
All right, Ernie? You just give a thumbs up, Ernie, if you're a yes or a no.
Yeah, I had trouble finding my, yes.
All right, Ginger?
Yes.
Scott?
Aye.
Nicholas?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Sheriff?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
And Chair? Chair Zima?
Yes.
All right, we can move on to item D6.
Okay, we have to review the remaining process required. If we follow our historic pattern, the next step in the process would be to go into a process where we would identify each applicant as either eligible or not eligible based on the ballot language and any subsequent legal determinations and so on. Then that would be my proposal, where we would end the meeting today, based on the desire of some members to forward questions and clarifications and simply the timeline of the clock. Following that, then I would propose that on the meeting on the 11th, we ask all of the committee members to be in a position to begin to do the 1, 2, 3 ranking. I believe that process was supported at a previous kind of organizational discussion. So we would bring a ranking structure to each of the applicants. And then following that initial ranking process, we would go back, and in the case of ties of ranking number and so on, then the committee would prioritize all of those applicants of the same numerical rank in an order. And then that process would ultimately lead to a numerically ordered list from 1 to, I guess, 30 in this case, indicating that the priorities of the committee were identified. There had been some subsequent discussion in prior meetings about chiseling a little bit of money out of the fire departments, or some of the agencies actually offered up some money last year to try to get us to the point where we could get down to the next applicant in the line. And I assume we would undergo that process this year, but is the committee comfortable with that same process being executed this year?
Yeah,
or let me say, are there any objections to that process? Mr. Robertson?
Just a clarifying question. The process we did last year was different than the year before. last year, we just offered any applicant to make a voluntary reduction to allow others to get something. And we went forward from there, and there were no further reductions. I just wanted to clarify or confirm that we would be doing that process in terms of what you just said.
Okay, so just to clarify, what you're suggesting is that process of maybe tailoring or slightly winnowing the applications you're suggesting should take place before the ranking process began?
That I'm saying that's what we did last year. It was very effective, in my opinion, compared to the year before.
Okay, just help me be clear. Are you suggesting that discussion take place before or after our initial ranking is accomplished?
Well, like I said, that last year it began before.
Okay.
And I would like the other committee members to either confirm or deny my recollection. And I do recall Sheriff Hansel is the one who suggested or recommended that when we began. And we also did no partial funding, like, etc. We stopped that practice.
Okay. I'm completely open to that process. What are the thoughts of the committee members? Mr. Cole?
I would support asking for any application reductions before the ranking process.
Okay.
My
Any other? Sheriff Hansel?
Yeah, my only concern is that I'm not sure if everyone is present at this meeting because you know that has an application and is prepared to make those reductions. So I think maybe just again referring that, saying, listen, next meeting, this is how much money we have, this is how many allocations we have. Maybe you need to come with a revised budget, you know, prepared ahead of time for discussion prior to us voting for the rankings, so we know exactly how much we have to spend.
So just a point of clarification. My understanding was today we're deciding on eligibility or not. Next meeting, we're deciding on ranking. So when you asked me if we should have voluntary reductions before ranking, my understanding of that is that would be at the next meeting, not at this one. So I think that would address the sheriff's concern and would be obviously a much more fair process for the applicants.
Okay. We could, to try to address the sheriff's concern, we could certainly request that staff communicate to the applicants and say, you know, we are looking at what, 7.8 million in requests and 4 million in capability. If your application has the capability to be modified, you know, we would want you to communicate that to us prior to the 11th. Is that something we could accomplish at the staff level? Okay, Sean?
Yes, we can, Chair.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it will be available to be, let's see, Thursday. Gosh, so that would have to be done by Monday. It would be a quick turnaround time, but we could do everything we can.
Yeah, just a mass email, I think, outlining the situation and indicating why the committee was making this request. And then individuals could decide whether they wanted to theoretically improve their chances by, you know, trimming their application a little bit. But that seems to me the best we can do at this point to try to meet the goal of broadening the application of the fund as much as we can. And if applicants are able to be responsive, so much the better. So is everybody comfortable with that process that we've discussed here as kind of amended by Mr. Robertson? Anybody opposed? Let me put it that way. Okay, so that will be the discussion as far as D6, our remaining process. Is everybody have the capability to hang for a few more minutes and go through the?
Chair, sorry, so was that a motion to have staff communicate out to the applicants, letting them know to submit their voluntary reductions as soon as they can?
I think we can generate such a motion since it didn't actually occur. Would somebody so move, please?
I so move.
Okay, Mr. Cole so moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Robertson seconds. Okay, the motion would be that the staff would communicate to all applicants our desire to have them take a second look at their applications and communicate the 2-to-1 nature of the funding capability versus available revenue, and ask that they make any modifications that might help us and might make their application more competitive. Any committee discussion? Any public comment? None? Okay. All,
Hold on, we do have one member of the public. And Miss, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to ask in your rankings and all of your things that one of the proposals on there, and I do have a dog in this fight on that one, was actually high up on the Board of Supervisors list that you had sent them to fund, and they overlooked it entirely. And so the application has been resubmitted. And so I was just wondering if that is something that you would consider in your ranking of things, is that it was kind of high up there to begin with and then kind of got kicked back down to the bottom again, and then kind of high. Hopefully again, we'll get up there for that kind of thing.
just for disclosure purposes, can you tell us which application you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm referring to the radio infrastructure project.
Okay, for the sheriff's office?
Yeah, the sheriff's office.
Okay.
That it was like number, the second one that should have been funded on the Board of Supervisors list that you gave them, and then they just kind of hopscotched around right past it. So
Yeah, that application clearly is going to be before us again, probably next week. So you're certainly welcome to speak to its attributes and so on at that time. I don't know, I would say we're an advisory committee, first of all. So we make a recommendation and the Board of Supervisors ultimately makes the decision. But we certainly would entertain your input at that point in time.
okay, will do.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion to request staff communicate to the applicants regarding potential reductions in their applications. There was no further committee discussion. All those in favor?
Let's see.
Or do you want to go through a roll? Yeah.
Let's see. Ernie. Yes.
Aye.
All right. Ginger.
Yes.
Scott.
Aye.
Eddie. Oh, I'm sorry. Nicholas.
Yes.
Glenn.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Sheriff.
Yes.
Justin.
Yes.
And Bob.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Question to the committee. According to our kind of general operating rules, we only have 11 minutes left in our session. Is it the desire of the committee to begin the process of inclusion or exclusion, or would you like to continue that to the next meeting?
I would prefer to move forward.
I second that.
I'm sorry, was that move forward, Nicholas?
Yes.
Okay. Any objections to us going a little over time to try to get through the process of doing the inclusion exclusion part of the ranking process? Any public comment?
I don't see any.
Okay, so we'll move to the list of applications. The staff has provided a nicely organized, thank you, collated and even numerically tabbed set of documents. So we'll just go through those in numerical order. And
Can I intervene just for a second, Glenn? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Prior to that, can we just read? I know we have a couple new people here. Just read the ballot language so we know
absolutely
exactly what is there. Sean,
Mr. Quincy, can you take a look at the Bible for us and give us a quotation?
Yes, and oh, I just had it up. Hold on. Oh no. Doggone it. Oh, let's see.
Here, I have it in my hands.
Okay.
To maintain, improve essential services such as 24-hour sheriff's patrols, 911 emergency response, crime investigation / prosecution, drug / illegal marijuana grow house enforcement / prevention, services for abused children / mentally ill, rural fire protection, road repairs, and other county services.
Bob, so that was the original, that was Measure Z, that was the original. Measure O had slightly different language. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can see the Measure O language here. Measure O was maintain essential services, including 911 emergency response, rural ambulance, fire protection, ensuring 24-hour sheriff's patrol, providing children's mental health / victims of child abuse services, emergency communication systems, repairing deteriorating roads, and other essential general services.
Okay, everybody clear? Any questions about the guardrails as far as eligibility is concerned?
I have a question, Chairman.
Certainly. Go ahead.
There was nothing in here that said anything about disqualifying an application for funding a position of labor. So and we kind of didn't want to fund any positions, we would rather fund equipment, but that doesn't disqualify it, right?
Yeah, this part of the process is simply asking kind of a very simple question. Do you feel that this application falls within the guidelines generated by the Measure Z and Measure O ordinance? It doesn't speak to the merit of the application, and it doesn't speak to any prioritization process. It only speaks to the question, do you feel that this is a legitimate application within the guidelines established by the two ordinances?
Okay, I have another question. Is there anybody who voted no on any of these?
I have some that I have some questions about. Yes, I don't know if others do as well. I'm seeing heads nod, so I think there are some that are open to discussion.
I have a question.
Yes, Ginger.
So this is to staff. So I raised a question about number 27, and you may have sent me an answer, and I don't know if I did get that. Is that a state agency or not?
I had that same question.
It is.
Is it?
Okay.
It's a nonprofit, but it's still under the state agency, right, Billy?
Yes, yeah.
And
That's a lifeguard.
and it's my understanding that we're not allowed to fund any state agencies. We went through this a couple of years ago when they needed an inflatable boat for the lagoons. And I made arrangements with them, and they did get a boat, but it was through Wings. They donated the boat. But I feel like I just wanted to ask, because I had asked the question and then I don't think I had heard back.
Okay.
I love it. I want to help them do this, but I don't think they're qualified. That's all. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I
let's
have
go through
more
the
to say on that.
Go ahead.
As a supporter of it, I'd gotten some feedback from Alicia Hayes, who had put the question to council. The verbiage disqualifying it is no money goes back to the state specifically. It doesn't pertain specifically to state agencies. And in this case, it's a nonprofit. That said, there's no response yet from council as to the actual technicality of it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, maybe to facilitate the discussion here, let me go through them numerically. And if there's a clarifying question that you need to ask, let's ask that first. And then I'll ask, does anybody feel that this should be disqualified? And that will give the individual an opportunity to make that case. And then we can have the discussion and any vote that's necessary. Does that work for everybody? Okay. The first one is the Adult Protective Services and District Attorney's Office, the EVAS program. Anyone feel that there are any questions of clarity that need to be taken on this before we have a discussion? Okay. Does anyone feel that this is outside the requirements of the ordinance and should be excluded? I'm not seeing any indication that.
I
Nicholas is on there.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
I think it's outside of a strict reading of the ballot measure.
Okay, could you just kind of give us a little thumbnail of your ideas?
I like this application, but nowhere the specifics of the ordinance are saying children's mental health, public emergencies, communication systems. Nowhere is it listed district attorney's office or specifically adult mental health or adult services.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? Any discussion? Mr. Quincy, do we need to take public comment on each of these? I assume we do.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Any public comment on Mr. Cole's position that this is not eligible for funding?
Not seeing any.
Okay. Any discussion on the part of the community?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can we just do an up or down vote on each one of these?
Mm-hmm.
And not have this, I mean, I want to hear what folks want to say, but for right now, can we just go application number 1 and just go right across the board and each of us say yes or no? And then just leave it at that for today?
That was my thought, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that'd be all right, Chair.
The roll, just to be clarified, roll call vote on each item.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Just for clarification for me, Mr. Quincy, I'm not trying to either advocate or denigrate this application. Am I correct that certain elements of this have been previously funded? This isn't an entirely new program. We haven't historically funded portions of this same program, have we not?
I know that the district attorney's office has received Measure Z funding. I would have to go back into past applications to see exactly how much is this program.
Okay, I'm not disputing your position, Nicholas. I'm just saying my memory was that we had in fact historically funded this, which is not to say that we have to this year, certainly.
I'm just getting very strict on my reading now.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Okay, any more clarification questions on the part of any committee member before we vote to include or exclude? Mr. Robertson.
Well, if we're going to be that strict, I would encourage all the committee members to read the language that's on the application that all of the applicants submitted. That is a little bit more expansive than the pure ballot measure language that was read earlier. Otherwise, we're going to have a pretty short list.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah, Chair Zemer.
Sir.
Yeah, a lot of these are encompassed into that quote, general services. And so those are the things that kind of encompass a lot of county and government services. And so that is kind of a catch-all, so to speak, but we kind of get the overall goal of this. But in the ease of trying to get through this quickly, I would like to see some kind of either a raised hand or something like that, as opposed to doing a roll call, just so we can get through it a little more judiciously. Now it's
okay. Mr. Quincy, you have the capability to tile in such a way that will be functional for you.
Yeah, it might just take me a second. I'll let you know when I'm done counting on my fingers and toes.
Okay, and maybe if you could just announce what you believe to be the count, and that way if any of us see any obvious discrepancies or something, they'll be clarified.
Yeah, the reason why I was initially wanting to go person by person is because from the public side, they can't see the panel like we can view as panelists here.
Yes.
So I'll go ahead and announce the no's once I tally up, and I'll make sure confirm with you guys before we move on to the next one.
Okay. Any public comment on inclusion or exclusion of the API?
Chairman Zemer?
Sir. Ernie.
Can I make a suggestion?
Certainly.
That we go through this complete list and then ask for public comment at the end on any item they want to talk about. That would speed things up considerably.
Mr. Quincy, do you think that's acceptable or?
Yeah, I believe that's fine. We'll do the up or down vote, and then somebody can make a motion to accept the up or down vote the way that we have it.
And there's the public comment opportunity.
Comment that way, right?
Okay, all right. I think that's a good, thank you, Ernie. That's a good idea. Okay, the APS District Attorney's application. Those opposed? Those in favor of inclusion?
All right, so I have, the only opposed is Nicholas.
Okay, so that would be an included application at this point. The Arcata Police Department SRO officer. Any questions or clarifications of anyone? Okay, those opposed to his inclusion? Those in favor of inclusion?
All right, so I saw none opposed.
Okay. City of Trinidad, a request for a halftime sheriff's deputy. Any clarification issues? Mr. Robertson.
I believe last year Sheriff absorbed this and another half-time position. I was just assuming that if that was the case again, he would have said so. But I just wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, I had the same question. Sheriff Hunsel, you are able to staff these positions if in fact they were approved?
Well, I think that's a question that we can answer next week, but it does fit the ballot language, and, we're currently 12 deputies down. So
Okay.
that does not count this position. So.
Okay, so we'll leave that determination for following discussions. Okay, on the City of Trinidad halftime, those voting to not include it as eligible. Those voting to include it as eligible.
I saw none opposed.
Okay. Cooperation Humboldt, a project for food safety and funding of individuals to outreach to the community in an agricultural context. Any clarifying questions? Okay, those opposed to inclusion?
I see Ginger opposed, Scott, Nicholas, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, Justin, and Bob.
Okay, those in favor?
I see Ernie in favor.
Okay, so that would be excluded then. Cooperation Humboldt's Disaster Response and Community Resilience Program. Any clarifying questions? Okay, those opposed to inclusion?
I see, let's see, Ginger, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, Justin, and Bob.
Okay, those in favor of inclusion?
See Scott, Nicholas, and Ernie, so that's 3 in favor and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed.
Okay, so that would be excluded. Eureka Broadcasting request for equipment, fuel tanks for generators and so on. Any clarifying questions? Those opposed to inclusion?
I do want to, I can point out one thing on this. If you didn't read this, they are part of our emergency broadcast system. They're them and KMUD. And so it is essential with all our power going down that they have backup power, for us to be able to send out the emergency message. So KMUD got funded last year, and this is just making sure that they have emergency power to sustain an emergency radio message if and when that is necessary. So that's why I'm voting yes.
Okay. Any votes to exclude Eureka Broadcasting? Votes for inclusion?
All right, I saw Bob was opposed, so that is 8-1.
So it is included. Eureka City Schools, SRO officer, any clarifying questions? Okay, those opposed to inclusion? Those in favor of inclusion?
All right, I saw none opposed, so that's 9-0.
Okay. EPD, the mist and uplift programs, any clarifying questions? Okay, those opposed to inclusion?
Chair, it looks like Ernie, oh wait, sorry. I
Ernie
think-
froze.
Okay, we're talking about the EPD mist and uplift. Did I miss a clarifying question or saw someone?
No.
Okay, those in favor of exclusion? Those in favor of inclusion?
All right, I saw no exclusion, so that is 9-0.
Okay. Fortuna Police Department Drug Task Force Officer, any clarifying questions? Anyone voting for exclusion? Those voting for inclusion?
All right, I saw no votes, so that is again 9-0.
Okay. Fortuna Police Department K-9 position, any clarifying questions? Okay, anyone voting to exclude? Voting to include?
All right, I saw no no's, so that is again, that's 9-0. And that is for application number 10, Fortuna Police Department.
Yes.
Let's see, Eddie, just because we're trying to count all these numbers, you're not a vote, just so that everybody knows, Eddie is not a voting member, he's an alternate. So yeah, I appreciate it, Eddie, thanks.
Okay, Fortuna Police Department radio, 25 portable radios, any clarifying questions? Anyone voting to exclude? Votes for inclusion?
All right, I saw no's, so that's again 9-0. That is application number 11.
Okay,
Thank
number
you.
12 is the Fortuna Police Department SRO officer. Any clarifying questions? Okay, anyone voting to exclude? Those voting to include?
All right, again, 9-0.
Okay, Free to Fly Foundation Single Moms Fund, recovery and support for single mothers. Any clarifying questions? Anyone voting to exclude?
I see Scott, Ginger, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, and Bob. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 no's.
Okay, and those voting in favor of inclusion?
Ernie, Nick, and Justin.
Okay, so that one would not be included. The Garberville Redway Public Restroom Working Group funding for support of the public restroom in Garberville. Any clarifying questions? Voting to exclude?
Exclude, I have Ginger, Scott, Nick, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, and Bob. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7 no's.
Okay, so that would be excluded. That was number 14. Humboldt County Fire Chiefs Association, the aggregate proposal for the fire service. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Voting to include?
All right, that's 9-0.
Okay, application 16, the Humboldt County Public Defender document integration proposal. Any clarifying questions? Voting to exclude? Okay, voting to include?
All right, so that is again 9-0. That's 9 yeses and 0 no's when I say 9-0.
Okay. Humboldt County Public Works number 17, chip seal funding. Any clarifying questions? Mr. Bronco, aren't you going to tell us about the glorious chip sealing process?
Not at this time.
Not at this time, okay. All those voting to exclude? Okay, include.
All right, that is 9-0 again.
Okay, Humboldt County Public Works, Oak and F traffic signal. Any clarifying questions? Voting to exclude? Voting to include?
Again, 9-0.
Okay, Humboldt County Public Works, number 19, illegal dumping program, funding for removal of debris and so on. Any clarifying questions? Anyone voting to exclude? Okay, those voting to include?
Again, 9-0. And when we're done with this kind of round robin voting, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can go over all the votes, but I just need this view here so that I can see everybody's face.
Okay, Humboldt County Public Works, PSA funding. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude?
I see, this is application number 20. I see Nick and Glenn.
Okay, voting to include?
And so that would be 7-2 in favor.
Okay, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, the body camera purchase. Any clarifying questions? Voting to exclude? Voting to include?
All right, that is 9-0.
Okay, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office dispatch, funding additional dispatchers for the sheriff's agency. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Those voting to include?
All right, I see 9-0 again.
Okay, number 23, radio infrastructure, the Pierce Mountain, Pratt Mountain repeaters. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Those voting to include?
9-0.
Okay, Humboldt Metatrans, basically subsidizing the Metatrans transportation program. Any clarifying questions? Voting to exclude?
I see Ginger, Scott, Sean, Sheriff, Justin, and Bob says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 no's.
Okay. Keweenaw Medical Center, the ambulance service in the Hoopa and Willow Creek areas. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Voting to include?
That is 9-0.
Okay. Lolita Chamber of Commerce, variety of projects within the Lolita area. Any clarifying questions? Okay, those voting to exclude?
Chair, I had a question.
Certainly.
Just to Sheriff Hansel, if this is under HCSO.
So this applicant did not reach out to me for any clarification or any of the numbers or to go over this application, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, number 26, then the Lolita Chamber of Commerce.
Wait, I'm sorry. Okay, that was 25 was 9-0, correct?
Yes.
Come out, okay.
Number 26 is Lolita Chamber of Commerce, a variety of civic services in the Lolita area. Those voting to exclude?
I see Sean and Justin.
Okay, those voting to include?
So that would be 7-2.
Okay, it's included. The Redwood Parks Conservancy, lifeguard and apparently education in schools and so on regarding water safety. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude?
Let's see, Ernie, Glenn, and Sheriff.
And I'm seeing Ginger too.
Oh, sorry. And Ginger. Good call.
Okay. And those voting to include?
So include is, I see Scott, Nick, Sean, and Justin, and Bob. So I have that at 5-4.
So it's included at this point. Okay, 28 Riverdale Police Department, MDTs for patrol vehicles. Any clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Those voting to include?
All right. It's like 9-0.
Okay. Sober First LLC. I'm at a loss to describe this. It looks to me like it's some sort of computer access process for supporting a client group and so on. Any clarifying questions? Those who would vote to exclude?
I see Ernie, Ginger, Scott, Nick, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, Justin, Bob.
Those voting to include?
I have that at 0-9.
Okay. Southern Trinity Area Rescue, the ambulance service in the Ruth Lake area. Anyone have clarifying questions? Those voting to exclude? Voting to include?
I have that at 9-0.
Okay. Just because the list is shorter, let me confirm with Mr. Quincy. I'm showing number 4, Cooperation Humboldt, and number 5, Cooperation Humboldt, not included. I'm showing number 13 and number 14, not included. And I'm showing number 24, Humboldt Metatrans, not included. And then number 29, Sober First LLC, also not included. Is that correct?
That's what I have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total not included. The ones that you described is what I have also.
Wait a minute, that's 6, isn't it? We have number 4, number 5, number 13, number 14, number 24, and 29.
Oh, 29. Sorry, yes.
Okay, so we have those 6 would be excluded.
Correct.
Okay. This would be an opportunity for the public to make any comments on the rating or the inclusion, exclusion of any of the applications. Do we have any comment from public members?
Mr. Chair, may I make a comment real quick?
Certainly.
So on item number 14, there's definitely a yes vote for me, and I'm sure Ernie's a yes on that too.
Are you asking that be polled again? Did you think the posting was incorrect?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's do number 14 again, the Garverville Redway Public Restroom Working Group. Those in favor of exclusion?
Exclusion, I have Ginger, Scott, Nick, Glenn, Sean, Sheriff, and Bob. For Justin, just for clarification, once I just recorded the no's and assumed if you want to know, you were a yes.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew it wouldn't change the result. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Any members of the public like to comment on the decisions made by the committee as far as inclusion or exclusion? Do we have any public input?
Yes, we do. And I will bring them in. Like Jack Brizell.
Yes, sorry. Actually, I raised my hand in the beginning of all of this when we were talking about the EBAS program with the district attorney and APS. I was going to clarify some things. I was invited here to answer questions about the program. I'm the applicant for that, or one of them anyway. My name is Jack Brazil, and I'm the Deputy Branch Director for the Department of Health and Human Services Behavioral Health Branch. But now that I see that it has passed, I appreciate that it passed. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful program. definitely designed to keep our community safe, and I appreciate your consideration for it, but I don't have any further comments on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment?
Yep.
And
We
may I
have-
comment as public?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make comment on number 13. I do believe it speaks directly to child mental health.
Okay.
All right, we have one more public comment. Bob Freelick.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still hanging in with you folks. I was excluded in terms of the application, and I'd just like a little clarification or a little idea, because it seems to me that, you know, the criteria of public safety and essential services, that a public restroom in a town that doesn't really have any public restrooms, given the disease that can be caused by human wastes on the street. It seems to me just a public toilet ought to be an essential service, and that as far as keeping waste off the street, which we had a lot more of before this public toilet was built, it seems to me that it fits the criteria, and I'm just wondering what some of the objections might be.
I can only speak for myself, Mr. Froelich. And given the capability to fund only essentially 50% of the applications and so on, and looking at, I'll call it relative compliance with the language of the measure, I felt that this application did not, meet the intent of the particular measure from my perspective. That is just one person's view, and I can only speak for myself, but I just do not see this as being in line with the intention of the measure passed by the voters. Whether, I certainly don't debate its desirability and so on. I mean, on its surface, it's clearly desirable, but the question for us isn't, is it desirable? The question for us is, does it meet the intent of the Measure Z and Measure O language? And I can't come to the conclusion that it does personally.
Chair, might I suggest for these public comments that we allow public comment, and then your committee can take notes and choose to, continue the conversation after we do all public comment, so that we don't get into a back and forth with people who are with public commenters.
Okay, I respect what you're saying. I think Mr. Froelich, I want to be able to try to be as open and transparent as possible, but I respect what you're saying, Mr. Quincy, as far as process is concerned.
Thanks.
Any other public comments?
We do. We have one more. Oscar Mogollon.
Go ahead. Welcome.
Hi, Oscar here. I'm representing Cooperation Humboldt. We applied. We were Measure 5, community disaster response and community resilience. I really want to appreciate the process here, and just hold you guys all to a very high standard. I really think that the process here came out, well. I know that we didn't get passed, but I would like to take this as a learning opportunity and get some insight on what could have been different, because my main consideration is that perhaps asking for paid positions was unfavorable to the board. And I know that does not disqualify us, but I understand that there are other priorities that the board is trying to put at hand. So again, as a learning opportunity, it would be great to know what else could have helped our application, because we are still going to continue to offer our support to the community. Our program area is working with the Humboldt COAD Coalition. We're going to be in communication with the new COAD director. We are in immediate connection with Andrew Bogar, who's the director of American Red Cross up here. And we've also been speaking to Ryan Derby, who is head of the Department of OES. And so we felt that we did a lot of extensive research, and we learned a lot about the absent gaps in the community. And we feel that maybe that those gaps are not easily identifiable by everybody on this board. So perhaps having a discussion at some point, perhaps not at this moment, would be very beneficial both for us to understand what we could do better in the future for further applications, as well as giving some good background and research for the board members to have a good, clear understanding of what the intention of our program area is.
I appreciate that, sir. Just, I don't want to get, like, as staff indicated, we try not to get it back into a back and forth, but understand that this discussion was not on the merits or the needs of the community, unfortunately. This discussion only was a consideration of, does the application meet the requirements of the and intent of the measure? So please don't interpret our vote to indicate anything relative to the merit. The vote was only indicating whether we felt that the application was congruent with the language of the measure. And those are two very different things.
All right, we have one more, Debbie.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Debbie Hart. I'm with the Slow F Street group, and I wanted to say thank you. It was good to watch your process, and I wanted to have some understanding around, next steps. So that is today's, I think that Glenn, you just answered my question really. And I know that there's not a time or need for going back and forth, but I wanted to thank the Public Works Department and Tom for filling out the application as discussed last February. And thanks again for your time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions from, no other hands raised from the public. So this is, now I think we can take a motion to accept the voting as we have it, as I have it here on the up or down.
This is Bob. I make a motion to accept.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the process as represented by staff as far as inclusion, exclusion. Any discussion on the part of the committee members? Any discussion on the part of the public? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, can you still see everybody, Mr. Quincy?
I can, yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
All right.
Opposed?
9-0.
Okay, so the motion carries.
Okay.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda today. Any quick questions or operational issues? I would again encourage you, if you have questions of applicants, to get those to the staff as soon as possible so they can be communicated to the applicants, and that way have a better opportunity to have a response by the time we meet next week on the 11th. Any committee member comments or anything before we close?
Thank you, Chair, for a well-run meeting.
Okay,
I
well,
make a
we're trying.
motion to conclude the meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn, and I think we're going to accomplish that. So we'll see you back here again on the 11th, and be prepared to discuss your clarification issues and then begin the process of ranking the applicants. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, staff. If you convey my appreciation, especially, I'm an old paper guy, and having all this organized and labeled and stuff by your staff was quite an advantage. It saved me a lot of time, and I appreciate it.
Our staff worked really hard on it. Thank you guys for the meeting today.
Okay, take care.